Hi everyone, I am Jason. I am a clinical psychologist. I've been involved with Shine for quite a few years now, and in my day job, one of the areas of work that I'm involved with is supporting people who have all sorts of physical conditions, medical diagnoses, and helping people cope with the psychological effects or consequences of those conditions and the adjustment to living with these conditions. And so cancer is one of the conditions I have some experience with. So Kyle and I talked about a number of things that I might talk about tonight. And what she asked me to speak about was the topic of difficult, negative, or kind of uncomfortable thoughts. As we know all too well, when life throws a pretty horrible thing at us like cancer, life gets pretty stressful, and it's very easy for our heads to be full of pretty unpleasant things. And one of the things that I often do with people in my job is to talk to them about responding to and coping with these types of thoughts. So we're going to talk about that a little bit tonight. And if we go to the screen, let's not waste 3 slides that I've lovingly prepared. It'd be a bit of a waste otherwise. There's some busy colours here, guys, so apologies in advance. But just before we get going, I'll just say that what we are going to talk about might be a little bit difficult or distressing. We're certainly not going to kind of intentionally do that, but just by the nature of the topic, it might be a bit of a button pusher for you. That's absolutely fine. It's really normal. So you should feel completely free to dip out. Some people like to have their cameras off as a way to help. That's totally fine. You may need some support, because you may just need to go and kind of offload or have a chat with someone. If it's a real issue what we talk about tonight, you've got a couple of options. You can drop me an email, and I can put you in the direction of some support services, or help you to think about what you might do next if this is a major issue for you. But I've also just put a couple of links in the slide here as examples of some more local support services. Right, okay. So what we're going to talk about specifically, difficult thoughts, obviously, as I mentioned, but we're also going to talk about a few strategies that you can try to help cope with difficult thoughts. It's really important to say here that this is just going to be a really brief introduction. Certainly not going to cover it in the detail that I would when working individually with someone. But I just want to give you a feel for some of the possibilities that are out there. And what I'm going to talk about is just a couple of the many possibilities. So there's no silver bullet with this stuff, is the other thing I'd say. Difficult thoughts are difficult thoughts, right? And a bit tricky to tame by their very nature. So, if you go away and do try some of these things and they're helpful, that's absolutely brilliant. If they're not, don't lose hope, because it may be a case of just finding a combination of strategies that gives you a bit of relief. Yeah, okay. Please drop in questions or comments at any time. Tatum's going to just keep a bit of an eye on those and just throw any classic questions at me. But I'm going to ask a few questions as well. I really encourage you to type some ideas, feedback, comments in the chat itself, and we can have a bit of a look at those as we go through as well. All right, so let's kick it off. So let's just kick it off with a basic kind of question as a bit of reflection. I want you to think about what comes to mind when you hear the phrase difficult thoughts. I've got an idea in my head of what it is, but I'd be really keen to hear what you have to say about that. So type in what comes to mind for you when you hear the term difficult thoughts. and I have found the chat window here, so I can see it too, Tatum, so I'm not completely useless. We got Dominic. Thoughts without an immediate answer, lots of uncertainty around them. Yeah, it's a really good point, Dominic. Damaging thoughts. Yeah, what else we got? What else comes to mind, or what do you mean by difficult thoughts? What do you mean by that phrase? Low self-esteem. Yeah, lots of difficult thoughts associated with low self-esteem or feeling a sense of low worth in yourself. Thoughts I'm reluctant to continue thinking about. Yeah, want to change. Mental topics. Yep, that's a real common feature of difficult thoughts. We often want to get away from them mentally or physically. Another comment from Dominic, sometimes thoughts come in image form, quite distressing, worst case scenario. Yeah, so difficult thoughts can have a visual component or come in visual form. That's quite common, Dominic, absolutely. And worst case scenario is a really good example of a difficult thought. It's something that we're all capable and prone to doing, is think about worst case scenarios, particularly when we're really stressed. Yeah. Recurrence of my son's cancer. Yep, absolutely sure. Yep. That's a real battle in cancer when you go into remission or when on watch and wait. Yep, scanxiety is a really, really difficult thing to deal with and is associated with all sorts of difficult thoughts. Any other ideas or thoughts? Right. Yeah, upsetting or painful thoughts are triggers. Absolutely, Emma. And that's a really key component of difficult thoughts that make it difficult for us to respond to them in a way that might be helpful in a given situation. But this is very normal, very natural again, that the pain or the unpleasant affective or emotional component really does forces us to kind of repel away from difficult thoughts. Yeah, but that in itself can create a whole new set of problems, which we'll talk about a little bit. Yeah, any other comments or questions before we move on there? Those are some really, really good points. Thank you. Chemo damage to a loved one's fertility. Yeah, yeah. That's a really important issue, particularly in cancer and having treatment, especially chemo. Any kind of systemic kind of treatment, right? It has all sorts of knock-on effects. And that's a really difficult thing to balance in your mind. Need treatment, but what other implications long term? Yeah. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Let's move on a little bit. Okay. So there's no right or wrong definition of difficult thoughts, but the way that I think about it is basically difficult thought. DT is any thought that's unwanted, unpleasant, negative, and or triggering, or activates some other kind of difficult psychological state in addition to it. Now, I don't tend to use the word negative thoughts. I tend to use the term difficult thoughts because difficult thoughts often contain important information for us, and there are things we can learn from difficult thoughts. So when we use the term negative thought, that often shuts off that possibility or that kind of desire to kind of lean into difficult thoughts and see what we can learn from them. Yeah. So difficult thoughts are accompanied by unpleasant emotions and feelings, right? As we talked about in reaction to some of your comments there. So difficult thoughts have this emotional or feeling component. Difficult thoughts usually have a physical or what we call somatic component, right? So physical sensations. If we take a difficult thought, like something terrible is about to happen, that is likely to generate emotions of anxiety or fear. And in turn, that's going to generate a whole series or cascade of physiological responses, like racing heart, trembling, shaking, sweating, that sort of thing. So we have the emotional and physical component to difficult thoughts, and we often also have a behavioural component to difficult thoughts, or an urge, a behavioural urge to do something. So if you have the difficult thought, something terrible is about to happen, the urge might be to get out of the situation, remove yourself from the place or the location you are at that moment. So maybe just an urge, or you may actually do that. So we've got these different bits and pieces that come together with difficult thoughts to make them more powerful, more influential, more horrible. Okay. And on top of that, if that's not enough for you, we also can have some additional discomfort, right? So we've got the initial discomfort from the difficult thought itself and the accompanying emotions, physical sensations, urges. But we can also experience distress about difficult thoughts themselves. So people can get distressed or upset about having difficult thoughts in the first place, right? And so that can make difficult thoughts even more challenging, and even bigger and even more unpleasant. And we also have additional discomfort through failed efforts to get rid of difficult thoughts or change or modify them in some way. So we have a couple of layers here to difficult thoughts. The difficult thoughts and the immediate or direct response, and then additional discomfort that can come from our reactions to difficult thoughts, right? Having thoughts such as, I shouldn't have this thought, I shouldn't feel this way, why does this keep happening to me, right? So that's distress about the difficult thoughts themselves, which makes the unpleasantness bigger. And if we believe or think or want to get rid of those difficult thoughts, we can't, that's going to create extra distress as well. It's kind of like saying to you all, whatever you do in this very moment, don't imagine a pink elephant sitting on my head. Whatever you do, do not visualize it, right? You can't help but do it. This is thought suppression, right? And so often with thought suppression, the harder we try and get something out of our mind, the more of it we end up having. So this is why in trying to get rid of, suppress, or distract ourselves from difficult thoughts, we can sometimes have the opposite of the intended effect. Yeah. Feel free to drop in questions or comments as we go along, as I mentioned earlier. But what I want to do now is ask you this question. So put on your psychologist hats for a moment here. And how would you answer this question? Given they're so bloody horrible, these difficult thoughts, why would our brain produce difficult thoughts in the first place? What the hell is the point, or why would our brains do this to us? Tell me your ideas there. I'd be really interested to see what you have to say. It's always an uncomfortable, awkward moment while we're waiting for the comments to roll in. Thank you, Dominic. Saved us. Thank you. To prepare and plan for situations, perhaps. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's absolutely a function of difficult thoughts. Trying to come up with a solution to a problem. Yeah, nice one, Ed. To protect us. Yeah, Ross, absolutely. Yeah, these are all really good points. What else? Why else might our brain produce these things? The present experience we've had, it makes sense of it. Absolutely. Okay, this is beautiful. I'm going to hand out some honorary PhDs here. Those are all really, really good points. Difficult thoughts simply a result of hearing difficult facts. What else have we got? Any other theories or ideas on the function of difficult thoughts or the reason for them? It's absolutely fine. I think you've captured a few really good points here, and I see this a lot. So we aren't surprised. Yeah. Tim, that's a really, really good point. Absolutely. This is about preparation, right? There's a bit of in our brain that's a compulsive prepper, right? So this is kind of wants to dig the bunker, get all the canned food in, right, to survive the next 50 years, whatever happens. And this we aren't surprised is a really common function or reason why difficult thoughts occur. Because if they're difficult thoughts, then by their very nature, they're in relation to something unpleasant, and we don't want to be caught off guard, right? Yeah. Fear of loss. Yeah. Yeah. All those are really relevant points, really accurate. And I see all of these explanations and functions as I work with clients. So absolutely, I think one of the really important ones is about trying to understand and respond to something distressing or uncomfortable, unpleasant or unwanted. But we can end up spinning our wheels and kind of getting nowhere, because there is a tendency in trying to answer these questions of just getting into an unproductive circular set of questions for which we can't really answer, or they're too hard to answer. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Okay. So why do we have difficult thoughts? It's really important to remember that we're hardwired to have difficult thoughts. There's not something wrong with you if you have difficult thoughts, because our brain is designed to produce them, right? We didn't have a say in the design of our brains. We were kind of born with them. So, excuse me, this is one of the design features, if you like, of our brains, is that we are hardwired to experience difficult thoughts. And this is really about the brain trying to get our attention. This is about the brain trying to warn us. This is about the brain trying to prompt us into understanding and trying to make sense of the world. So all those points that you mentioned are relevant here and part of this slide, right? So difficult thoughts, I mean, everyone knows this, right? Difficult thoughts more frequent, life gets difficult. And as I said, difficult thoughts are unavoidable, yeah, because we're hardwired for them. It's important to remember, because I do see people who have some unhelpful or unrealistic beliefs or attitudes about difficult thoughts. I shouldn't have them at all. I should be able to get rid of them whenever I want to. I should have them only at these times and in this amount and at this level of intensity, right? Those sorts of rules, if you like, or assumptions can get people into trouble psychologically and cause unintended difficulties, additional difficulties. So difficult thoughts are part of difficult inner states. And I kind of alluded to difficult inner states on that previous slide when I talked about the emotional component, the physical or physiological component, and the behavioral urges component, right? So if you think about difficult thoughts as part of a wider psychological experience of difficult inner states, that can help put the pieces of the puzzle together. They all have an influence on each other as well, hence arrows going everywhere. Okay, and this is one of the reasons why we can get into downward spirals with difficult inner states, because the different components can feed and intensify the other. Cool. So what I'd like you to do now is write or record on your device a difficult thought that you're struggling with at the moment. Best that if it's not too heavy or too intense. I want you just to spend a couple of moments thinking about a difficult thought that's been prominent in your mind recently, maybe just today, over recent days. Nothing too intense or hardcore. And I want you to think about, once you've recorded that thought, how do you cope with difficult thoughts? What's your current game plan or sort of strategies that you employ? So I'll give you a couple of moments to do that. There's no need to type in the difficult thought unless you really want to. More importantly, I'd be interested in seeing your comments on what your current coping strategies are for dealing with difficult thoughts. And I can type in a couple that I know of and even use myself while you are thinking of a difficult thought and listing your own coping strategies. Okay. So I think I just sent my answers to Sheila only, not helpful. Apologies, Sheila. Let's try that again. So bonus content, Sheila. A lucky woman. All right, so I've put in a few ideas there. Coping strategies I've seen or even used myself to cope with difficult thought. What else is out there? What else do people do? Again, there's no right or wrong answers here. Just keen to capture a range of different strategies so we can all see the wonderful variation out there. Meditation, yoga, be open. Yeah. Be happy to expand on that, Sarah. Type in a few more words there and what you mean by being open, in what way. Talk about it. Thanks, Ed. Put on really loud music. Yeah. Aerobic exercise. Walk the dog, dancing. Yeah, so we've got physical movement and exercise for sure. Any kind of mental strategies that people use. So I put in distraction there. Okay, thanks, Sarah. So just being honest with people about how you're feeling. Worry tree, worry time. We've also got this suppression idea, telling yourself not to think about it. Put it off to think about later. Yep. Sometimes it works for people, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes we have the pink elephant effect with that, but at times it can help. Cry. Just like I cried when the All Blacks lost on Saturday. Some difficult thoughts around that, people. Any other suggestions? Are there any kind of suggestions that you think or know are really bad? Yeah. Informing yourself. Yeah, getting some information, reliable information. That's a really important response, Sheila. Thanks for that. Anything else? Any bad ones? Label the thought. Yep, that can be quite helpful, and we'll talk a bit about that, Dominic. Talk to a helpline. Yeah, seeking help seeking, writing a letter that you don't have to post. Yep, cool, nice one. Thanks, guys. It's really good. There's a lot of great suggestions there. Excellent. Right. Keep that difficult thought in mind that you've recorded. I was going to come back to it. Okay. So, as I said to you at the start, I'm going to talk about an approach that I often use with people, but this is just a taster, and this is not the only way to approach this. Okay. I really just want you to take away a sense that there are things that you can do. There are options for coping with and responding to difficult thoughts. And this is just a couple of possibilities. So an approach I take with people is a two-step process, basically. Step one is to kind of acknowledge, what I call acknowledge, allow, and detail. And then we've got a second step, which is an either or step where you either engage in mental unhooking or trying to rework the difficult thought. So there's several strategies in there really, but I just wanted to kind of break it down into a two-step process. And I'll just expand on that and talk a bit about what I mean. As I said, there are no silver bullets here, right? But if you get something useful from this, then absolutely brilliant. Okay, so what do I mean by acknowledge? So I'll take a sip of water before I cough again. So acknowledging is acknowledging the difficult thought through a strategy that I call notice and name. Okay, so difficult thoughts by their nature can come and go quite rapidly. They can flash across our conscious and then they'll be gone, right? And they move very quickly. There's various reasons for that, but we don't need to kind of go and get into the weeds there. So noticing and naming is about taking that fast process and just hitting pause. Okay, so when you have a difficult thought, we'll go back to that example. There's something terrible is about to happen. What you want to do is just kind of notice and consciously acknowledge to yourself that difficult thought's just occurred. It's just popped into your mind. The brain's just produced it. So that's what I mean by notice it and name it. Right? So catch it mentally and say, there's that difficult thought again. Something terrible is about to happen. Then or kind of part of that is about pausing. So this is the other important element here, that there is a pause. And the reason why we want to pause is that we have a wise, rational brain in there, even though it doesn't seem like it at times. And we need to give this bit of our brain a chance to catch up with the bit of our brain that produced the difficult thought. The bit of our brain that's produced the difficult thought is, you can think about it as the kind of alarm brain. It works very rapidly, very fast. But our kind of wise or rational brain works more slowly. It needs a bit of time. So by noticing, naming, pausing, it's giving a chance for our rational brain to catch up, come online, and then we've got it available and ready to make a response, for which there are many options. So consider this a moment to ask the alarm and the rational brains to work together. If you think about the alarm and the rational brain, neither are good or bad. They just have their different kind of features, their different kind of pros and cons, right? If we didn't have an alarm brain, we wouldn't last very long, right? If we didn't have a bit of our brain that says, hang on, there's an alarm, or, oh, is that something we should be worried about? If we didn't have a brain doing that, we would have all got hit by buses long ago, right? So this alarm brain serves a really important and valuable function. What can happen is that it can kind of get a bit bloated. It can get a bit oversized, or it can start kind of triggering off when there's no need for it to do so. So allowing the alarm and rational brain to talk to each other is really getting your two brains to say, okay, right, alarm's gone off. Thanks for that, alarm brain. Let's now just kind of take a little look at this and see, is this a genuine alarm? Is this a false alarm? Is this alarm being blown out of proportion, etc., etc.? So just simply pausing, noticing, and naming, that can be a really useful and important strategy, not only to identify the difficult thought, which is useful if you're keeping a record of difficult thoughts, keeping a thought diary, that sort of thing. But it also can sometimes be enough for your rational brain then to kick into gear and go, okay, there's no reason to really think something terrible is going to happen at the moment. I think this is just an uncomfortable or unpleasant place for you to be, because, you know, it's a doctor's surgery, or it's a hospital, or it's something like that. Okay. Right. Throw in your questions if you have any. Now, on this horrifically orange screen, we've got the next bit of the process, which I call allow. Okay, so we've done acknowledge through notice, name, pause, and then we want to think about allow. This is a bit of a weird concept if you've not come across it before. And this is allowing the difficult thought to be there. And this is really about not literally allowing it to be there, but giving up the struggle to engage in unhelpful responses like thought suppression, avoidance, excessive distraction, right? So allowing is about acknowledging the fact that my brain is hardwired to produce these things. It's going to happen. Life is particularly stressful at the moment, so it's going to happen more. So it's not surprising that this is going on, right? Allowing is not about kind of putting up with it. Allowing is about acknowledging the fact that this is part of life. It may be a really big part of my life at the moment, but it's not something abnormal or something to beat myself up over. Yeah, this is what allows all about. The difficult thoughts there for a reason. It's conveying some important information, and to really wrestle with it by kind of suppressing it or using some other inefficient strategy, it is really using up your energy where it could be directed somewhere else. Okay, so that's allow. So acknowledge, allow, and then detail in this first step. This is the third component of this first step. Detail the difficult thought is really about recording it. Okay, so listening to your brain and noting or recording the difficult thought. Difficult thoughts, of particularly anxious thoughts, really do very well in conditions in which they're kind of a bit vague, right? If we take anxiety, if you're having vague, anxious thoughts, it's very difficult to kind of pin those thoughts down and ask questions like, well, what exactly am I worried is going to happen here? With vague thoughts, there's a kind of general sense of dread and foreboding, right? And it's quite difficult to really pinpoint, well, what is this about? And with vague thoughts comes an escalation in the distress or the intensity of difficult thoughts. And because our alarm brain works very fast, produces these difficult thoughts very quickly, that is another way in which these thoughts are kept a bit vague, unspecified. You know, they're a bit hazy, we're not clear on them. We don't want that. We want to have a really good sense of what the difficult thought is. So this is about really listening to your brain. This is why pause is really useful. Sit there and mentally observe your brain and ask yourself, what is my brain saying to me right now? And just taking your time, not rushing it. And if your mind goes blank at that moment, that's quite normal too. Just give yourself a few moments, and often the difficult thought will come back to you. Okay. Discomfort's normal here because you are asking yourself to lean into something that's uncomfortable by nature, right? And if you're someone who tends to try and get away from difficult thoughts, avoid, suppress in some way, then it's going to be quite challenging to do the opposite of that, right? Because that's going against what feels right. But there's some real benefits leaning into difficult thoughts because we can detail them, we can learn about them, we can perhaps have a better chance of understanding the function of these difficult thoughts. And once we've got that information, there's lots more possibilities about how we cope and respond to difficult thoughts. Okay, so a little really brief exercise here. What I want you to do is make sure you're sitting comfortably. And I want you to gently close your eyes if you're happy to do so. And what I want you to do is practice this process of mentally observing thoughts. I'm going to shut my mouth for about 30 seconds or so. And I want you to mentally observe your brain and anything it's saying to you, any images it's throwing up. I want you to just observe that like you're watching a movie, essentially. It's okay if your mind goes blank, that's quite normal. There's no right or wrong things to hear or see. This is a wonderful exercise because you can't get it wrong. I'm going to keep quiet for 30 seconds, and I just want you to mentally observe your brain and anything it says or does. Right, go ahead. Okay, when you're ready, you can open your eyes again. So I'm really keen to hear what that was like for people. What were people's experiences? My experience was of a pretty scrambled brain where I immediately thought of something completely unrelated to what I'm doing right now. Yep. Very busy mind. Yeah. What else happened? What else did people notice or observe doing that little exercise? A lot of randomness, blank mind, thinking about thinking. What else happened? Worries coming and going. Stomach started tightening and breathing heavier. Replays of things from today. Lots of other little flashes of random things. Yeah. Planning. So I'm seeing lots of comments around the randomness of what your brain's doing. We also had that comment from Sarah about stomach tightening, breathing heavier. This is what we're talking about, that we're leaning into difficult thoughts can produce an unpleasant bodily response. And that's just simply another component of difficult inner experiences, right? That diagram I showed you earlier on. Often if we stick with it, if we hang with it, those unpleasant initial physical or physiological responses can just come down again, can settle down. Yeah. So randomness. Yep, my head was full of randomness as well. What happened there is I was encouraging you to experience something that we call being mode. Those of you who are familiar with mindfulness meditation practice, this will be a more familiar brain state for you to be in. The vast majority of the time we're in doing mode. We're planning, we're problem solving, we're trying to answer questions in our head. What being mode is mentally observing our inner world, our inner experiences. And in that small exercise there, I've got you to try and pause for a moment and switch from doing mode, processing what I'm saying, reflecting on it, maybe coming up with responses, to being mode, where we're simply observing, mentally observing our bodies in action. And got you to focus on your brain there, because I wanted you to see what kind of thoughts you might notice. Okay. And so when we think about the process of acknowledging, allowing, and detailing a difficult thought, that exercise can be a really nice way to achieve those steps in the first part of the process, right? Just to kind of pause and observe. That's basically what we're doing. There's a tendency, as I said, for these difficult thoughts to flash by at high speed because of their nature. We want to kind of get away from them, right? But doing the opposite, we can gather a lot of important information that we can use to generate more helpful coping strategies. Okay. So We've looked at acknowledge, allow detail. We'll just quickly look at mentally unhooking or reworking difficult thought. Okay. Mentally unhooking is all about mentally standing back from a difficult thought. When we're mentally hooked with a difficult thought or difficult inner states, they tend to ramp up, get bigger, get more intense, get more difficult, right? It's like if you imagine my glasses here as a difficult thought, right? When I'm hooked with a difficult thought, I'm actually kind of seeing the world through these glasses or through the thought. So I'm making an interpretation of the world as it's coloured or influenced by the thought itself. But if I'm mentally unhooking, I'm kind of more doing this. I'm kind of looking at the glasses or looking at the thought themselves. And you kind of did that, hopefully, with that short exercise where I got you to just mentally observe what your brain was doing, your brain's activity. This is one of many ways that we can mentally unhook. But there's all sorts of other ways to unhook, right? And the point is about unhooking is that for some people, just mentally unhooking from a difficult thought in itself can be really helpful and can stop the process of kind of a downward spiral or intensification of difficult thoughts and difficult inner states. Just to give you a couple of examples, we did a kind of visualization unhooking there, but we can do it verbally too. So if I take the thought, something terrible is about to happen, I could restate it, repeat it, but add to the front of it, I'm having the thought. So something terrible is about to happen becomes, I'm having the thought, something terrible is about to happen. And for some people, this is a really good way to remind them that what's happened here is not reality, but a thought, a thing that was produced by our brain, which may or may not be true, but it's still something that's been produced by our brain rather than something that's reality or fact or the real world. Yeah. We can unhook visually, and that exercise we just did could be seen as a visual form of unhooking as well, where you will sit there quietly and try and switch into being mode and mentally observe our thoughts as if they were words coming up on a screen or words printed in clouds in the sky. Any kind of like visual medium, if you like, on which you kind of plonk those thoughts on, that can be a useful way to kind of unhook, because you're taking them out of your mind, these difficult thoughts, out of your head, outside your body, and kind of metaphorically placing them on something else. And for some people, that's a really good way to unhook. It's a really helpful way to unhook. Then we can externalize, repeat the difficult thought in the voice of a humorous character, you know, like Yoda, character from The Simpsons, etc. Right? Humor is a really great way to unhook. So you repeat the thought, something terrible is about to happen, in a funny accent, funny voice of a favorite comedian. You could repeat it to a song, particularly like a nonsensical song or completely incongruent or unrelated song. So maybe there's a kids' TV show, you know, the theme song, and you kind of sing the thought back to yourself and to the tune of that particular song. Right? These are all ways to get you to try and unhook or step back. And whatever works for you is a good unhooking method. These are just a few examples, but there's all sorts. Now, what's really happening here is that we are just trying to get that mental distance. Difficult thoughts are difficult because they can feel like reality, or we become very hooked and fused with them. So unhooking doesn't always work, but if we have part of the nastiness being a consequence of being mentally hooked or fused with these thoughts, then unhooking can be a useful response. Okay. We are just going to skip that because we were talking about that. Finally, we've got reworking the difficult thought. Okay, so this is essentially a combination of techniques, and it's very different to mentally unhooking. Sometimes people combine them to good effect. Some people use one or the other. Sometimes unhooking works well in one situation, and then reworking the thought works good in another situation. Okay, there's no rules here, but it's a set of techniques to kind of evaluate, challenge, or look at a difficult thought from a different perspective. So it's a doing mode strategy, not a being mode strategy. And I just want to show you one example of reworking a difficult thought. And this is through the use of questions. So this is where you actually ask questions to a difficult thought. What I want you to do now is take the difficult thought that you recorded earlier. Okay, and what I want you to do is try answering one or more of the following questions in relation to the difficult thought that you noted. Here we go. So we've got a little selection of possibilities here for you. One is, what's my evidence for this thought? Another one is, what would I say to a friend who had this thought? Another question you can ask your difficult thought is, what am I assuming with this thought? And a fourth one is asking, is this thought helpful? So for example, if we take my difficult thought, something awful is going to happen. If I were to ask myself, what's the evidence for this thought? I might say something like, well, last time I was here in this hospital, I had a pretty bad experience. Got a kind of a fright. We had a medical kind of emergency. I thought something terrible was going to happen, but it turned out okay, thankfully. So I don't have any evidence that something terrible definitely is going to happen, but something has happened in the past, right? So for me, that kind of brings to my mind that probably past experience is perhaps generating this difficult thought here, but I don't necessarily have any kind of proof that something terrible is going to happen this time. Just an example of a response I might make to that particular thought, something terrible is going to happen. What would I say to a friend who had this thought? I might say to them something like, do you know for sure something terrible is going to happen? Or what specifically are you worried is going to happen? And let's kind of talk about that. Let's think about whether that's something we should be worried about or not. The other question, what am I assuming with this thought? So I might have a thought something terrible is going to happen. I'm assuming that because I'm here in this hospital, something bad must be about to happen because this place freaks me out. Okay, a follow-up question to that would be, okay, well, what do I make of that assumption? So, well, I'm kind of basing it on kind of fear rather than reality or what's going on right now. So perhaps it's not all that helpful to me. And along the lines of helpfulness, if I ask that thought, is this thought helpful? Something terrible is about to happen. Well, of course this is not helpful, Jason. What would be a more helpful thought, Jason? A more helpful thought would be that I am not comfortable being here. It's not easy for me to be here. That kind of makes sense. But I don't have any clear indication that something terrible is about to happen. Right? Okay. So that's just an example of some responses I might make to a thought like something terrible is about to happen. Now I'll zip my lips for a couple of minutes. You have a go if you haven't already. Just note down responses to one or more of those questions in regards to your difficult thought, and then we'll have a quick chat about that experience. So I'm just going to put myself on mute for a minute or two, and then we'll come back. Feel free to respond to one or more of those questions. Some of these questions work well for a given difficult thought and not so well for others. That's completely normal. This is why I give people a number of examples, right? So I think if you have at least a few of these up your sleeve, you can try different ones or different combinations at different times. The thing I would say about this particular strategy is it can really benefit from some practice. Yep. This might be quite hard to work with initially, but I've been doing this many years using this particular strategy, so it's probably fairly straightforward for me for the most part to come up with responses for myself, because I've had lots of practice with it. So it's okay if A, this doesn't work for you, or B, it's a bit difficult in the initial stages. Okay, so do you want to type in your comments? Any questions or comments about that particular exercise, what you experienced, what you noticed, perhaps questions about what you're unsure about, anything at all. Let's see a few comments in there, and then we can wrap things up and just throw things open to some general questions if there are any. Right, so let's see these comments flood in and overwhelm me. Thanks, Dominic. We've got at least one comment here. Relief. Okay. Easing of emotions once question it deeper. Okay, cool. Glad you had that experience. That's a common response for people. But if you don't have that response, if you don't get kind of relief, that's okay too, because the aim isn't necessarily to quieten down the unpleasantness that you're experiencing. If it does, brilliant, that's a bonus. But if nothing else, these questions can help you understand your difficult thoughts a bit more, and that can be useful in itself and perhaps bring some benefits a bit further down the track. Yeah. Other comments? Other aspects of people's experience trying that little exercise? No, not much more feedback. That's absolutely fine. Yeah. Yeah, so that might be a response you could generate for yourself, right? By asking that question, what would I say to a friend who had this thought? What most of us are really good at is giving other people sound advice, right? But we often don't apply that to ourselves. And what this question, I find, does for people is it kind of gets them over that kind of writer's block or that mental hump of, well, I don't know what to do with this thought. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to think. And almost by magic, when you say, what would you say to someone else who had this thought? Often it becomes much easier to make a response that often has validity for yourself as well. Cool. Any other comments? No problems. Okay. All right. Cool. So what I would say in summary is that difficult thoughts, unfortunately, are an unavoidable part of life. But as we talked about, and as you know through your own knowledge, expressed through the comments, difficult thoughts do have a place. They do have a function. Right? They have a function, and they carry potentially useful information for ourselves. Fighting or suppressing difficult thoughts can rob us of that opportunity to gain that understanding and information, and it can actually intensify the difficult thoughts and the unpleasant emotions and physical responses that come with it. So one response we can make, or one kind of recipe, if you like, is to think about a two-stage process where you acknowledge, allow, and detail the thought. So really listen into the thought and record it. Then either mentally unhook from the thought or consider reworking the difficult thought. Both strategies take some time and practice to develop. And as I said at the start, just really giving you a flavour for these strategies, giving you a bit of a taster. But certainly feel free to go ahead and try these and practice them a bit. Reach out if you've got kind of questions about them. Be really happy to help. And remember, there's many other strategies out there. And if nothing else, simply saying to yourself, this is normal. Yeah, this is unpleasant. This is an unpleasant part of life. There's not necessarily something wrong with me. I'm not necessarily losing my mind. That in itself can be a useful response for people. Okay. Questions? Right. I'm going to stop this screen share now. And I'm going to throw things open to comments and questions, either in the chat or if you want to even unmute yourself and so we can hear your voice, that's fine too. So let's sit here, Tatum, and see what people throw at us. Go ahead, people.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, I live in Ireland, and my son lives in London, and there are a lot of distressing thoughts around COVID separations.
Yeah.
And you're completely powerless over a virus, over governmental restrictions, over booster shots. So do these strategies work for something like that? I mean, I suppose you could substitute a cancer diagnosis for the virus.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think difficult thoughts are difficult thoughts, regardless of the subject or what's kind of generating them. So yes, definitely, by all means, these are strategies you could apply to that as well. And I think I've actually got a separate. I wrote an article last year that's on my website, on my blog page, my articles page, where I talk specifically about COVID and coping with the distress that causes. So feel free to pop over and have a look at that. Yeah.
What's the website called?
Yeah, I'll just put it in the chat. It is the practical. Oh, I'm for my glasses now because I've been.
Heard about the All Blacks. Are you from New Zealand?
Yeah, I'm a Kiwi. Yeah. So thepracticalpsych.com. And I've got like an articles page. So go there. But if you can't see it, just send me an email and I can send you the
practicalpsych.com.
Yeah.
My late husband was from Christchurch.
Really?
And he went to Christchurch Boys High, and this is a real rugby house.
Yeah. But we're good sort, us Kiwis, so.
But try to use your strategies on the All Blacks defeat.
Thanks, Angela. Thankfully, we don't lose all the time. That's why it's our number one sport. So hopefully we can win next game. Yeah. Thank you, Sheila. So Sarah's got a question. What about when the distressing thoughts is reality? Yeah. So my fiance has a terminal diagnosis and I have a lot of distressing thoughts about that. Yeah. So distressing thoughts can be inaccurate or they can be accurate, right? And for distressing thoughts for reality, what tends to work best for people is more the kind of unhooking and the notice and the naming, and some of this, and some of the questions may not work quite so well, but that's quite normal, right? So I think the normalizing the distressing thoughts they're trying to avoid the beating yourself up is quite important, and trying the unhooking is a good way to go. There's no way around it. Difficult thoughts are really normal, and you're going to get lots of them in that situation. So I was widowed 4 years ago, after my wife had a battle with cancer for over 7 years, and there's really prolonged periods of very difficult thoughts. And as I said, there is no silver bullet here. I think seeking that support, normalizing the occurrence of difficult thoughts, and I think if you get some additional benefit from unhooking or those questions, then that's a bonus. Other questions or comments that people have?
Does it work for bereavement?
Yes, a bereavement's a situation in which you're going to experience a lot of really challenging and quite intense, difficult thoughts, right, about all sorts of things.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and just like kind of COVID, just like having a partner or a family member has cancer, these are all going to produce difficult thoughts, and difficult thoughts are difficult thoughts, no matter where they come from. So I think it's a case of just trying these strategies, and if something works for you, then brilliant, you've kind of gained something from it. As I said, there's all sorts of other techniques and strategies. So if what we've talked about tonight doesn't resonate with you, or doesn't it's not particularly helpful, then yeah, don't kind of lose hope, because there's lots of stuff other stuff out there. And again, you can reach out, send me an email. I can send reading resources, other things to go and look at if you want some different ideas.
Thank you.
Welcome.
So Rose's message, and I could so relate to that. Why do I want to believe my distressing thoughts?
Yeah. Well, what are people's ideas there? Why is it that you want to, or feel like you want to believe difficult thoughts? Tatum, have you got any kind of thoughts or ideas here? Not to put you on the spot. There's no right or wrong answers here.
I mean, I think it feels unsafe to think any other way. Like, I think it's kind of like, it's that holding on to them because it's something rather than the uncertainty that's out here of possibility.
Yeah. Something like cancer produces so much uncertainty, right, in life. It's it really throws life into a lot of chaos. And for some people, worrying about something is a bit more concrete, or gives you something to do, than just kind of focusing on the unknown. And also it can give people a sense of, right, I can do something here, I can worry about something and try and plan or think about all the possible scenarios. And then if I try and think about how I respond. So often it's about people trying to get a sense of control or certainty in a situation that by its nature is really uncertain and really uncontrollable. Any other ideas around Rosa's question here? Why do I want to believe my difficult thoughts?
I've got one other extra bit. Sometimes they just sound so confident. Like, they sound like omnipotent voice almost, like you can be swept by that certainty or that confidence or that insistence that can come with the tone of the negative thought.
Yeah, absolutely. And when people describe that kind of experience, sometimes that's a person being very hooked with those difficult thoughts and that difficult inner state. It feels like it's real, it feels like it's very plausible, it's very believable. Sometimes that's about being hooked with those thoughts. Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah. Any other comments or questions? If people do have additional comments or questions, but they don't really want to put it in the chat, again, you're really welcome to reach out, send me a message, send me an email. For better or for worse, it's very easy to Google me. And I would be only too happy to answer any other questions you have, or if you're looking for other types of resources or more reading on this kind of stuff, really happy to help people.
Yeah, and Shine has the +1s group as well, Facebook group, and runs sessions for +1s, circle sessions. I know a couple of people are already in them or have been through them, but if you are hearing about it now for the first time, you can always drop us a message at Shine, and we can also point you towards some of the resources that are available. There's also, if you like I'm someone who really likes hearing information rather than reading it sometimes. So I do the Shine podcast, and I love podcasts because that's how I get most of my information about the world. And there is a podcast episode that's a +1s episode as well. So that's also quite nice, just to hear other people sort of talking about some of the thoughts and feelings that they've had as well, if that's useful.
Yeah. Cool. Well, Tatum, looks like we should wrap things up maybe. You're really welcome, Dominic. Yeah. And as I said, please send me a message anytime. I'm really happy to help. Yeah. Cool. All right. I guess that's it. Adam, thanks for controlling, making everything run smoothly. You're a legend.
Oh, you're very, very welcome. And Ed and Roz just said lovely thanks, and that was really useful. Where is the podcast? That's a really good question. So on the Shine page, under resources, the podcast is called Not Your Grandma's Cancer Show, and it's also on iTunes. So if you're on iTunes, that's the way to find it. It's also on the page as well. So yeah.
Thanks to everyone who made comments. It was really great. Lovely to kind of be here with you tonight, and I'm sure I will hear from you and talk to some of you soon. Thanks again, Tatum.
Yes, thank you.
See you, everyone.
Bye.